Just like that, the Seahawks have a winning record again. After a second straight last-minute win, Seattle is 8-7 and has cleared a path to the playoffs with just 2 games left. Joining us to discuss how we got here, how good this team actually is, and what needs to improve is scheme guru and football analyst Griffin Sturgeon. Let's light him up. I'm Jacson Bevins, and this is Cigar Thoughts. Welcome back to the Cigar Lounge. I am Jacson Bevins, and along with my socialite producer, Mike Barwin, this is the Cigar Thoughts podcast. Mike, how are we doing today?
Feeling merry, feeling jolly, feeling jacked up.
Good Christmas?
That's right. That's right. Merry Christmas, buddy. How are you doing? How was your holiday?
Oh, it was great, man. Really good time with family. We got to see the Seahawks win. We got to see the 49ers lose. Good Christmas, man.
That's right. A bountiful harvest of football that was.
It was. And, it wasn't pretty again, but the Seahawks won. And, look, wins matter. It really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how you got them. Wins matter. And even though I think Seattle made it a little bit tougher on themselves than they needed it to, there are no bad teams in the NFL. Even the worst teams are made up of really good football players. And for Seattle to go on the road on a short week after a Monday night game, after an emotional victory, traveling to the East Coast and winning a morning game for them on the road against a tough football team, this had trap game written all over it. All of the momentum that they built with that incredible win last week could have been lost to the Winds, and they didn't. They came through when they needed to.
When we saw that Ryan Tannehill was going to start that game, you didn't feel great about it. When you saw that they were missing half their defensive starters, like Jeffrey Simmons out, Sean Murphy-Bunting out, their injury report was a laundry list of names. When I saw all those guys that were going to be out for the game, I felt even worse about Seattle's chances.
Totally. It's like Pete Carroll is going to coach his team to the exact level of his opponent and then hope to win a 51 to 49% type of game.
Every game before kickoff, he asks, "What's the measuring stick, guys?" All right, we just need a millimeter past that, right?
I know it.
They got that millimeter. They came through in the end. Geno comes back and sees Drew Lock's game-winning drive in the final minute and says, "All right, let me show you what I got too." And they pulled it off. Our man Colby caught the game-winning touchdown. It was,
what up, Colby?
It was a nice rebound from an offense that looked disjointed and out of sorts early. So it was great to see them regain their footing a bit at the end there and come through.
It really was, man. And the vibes, Mike, they are back with the Seahawks, but they never left the pod. We're going to keep the momentum rolling with our guest in a moment. But real quick, if you're listening or watching us right now, it's hopefully because you like the show. And if you like the show, there are a few ways you can support it. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, take a couple seconds to leave us a 5-star rating. And if you're feeling super supportive, a quick review as well. You can do that right now. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll find full video episodes, entertaining clips, and the audio reads of nearly every Cigar Thoughts article after each game this season. This is probably the best way to help the show grow, and growth is going to enable us to bring more of our football discourse your way. So we're grateful for the few seconds it takes to like and subscribe. We're also thrilled to announce an awesome partnership with Westland Distillery in Seattle, which is my favorite local whiskey maker. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see me enjoying a glass of their single cask, barrel number 6554, which combines a smooth sipping experience and tons of flavor. Westland is an American single malt distillery in Sodo neighborhood of Seattle. Their tasting room and bar are open to the public, where they serve whiskey flights, cocktails, and small plates. They've got a bottle shop on site featuring distillery exclusive releases and more. They're located at 2931 First Avenue, a little over a mile south of Lumen Field. And their Garyana number 8 was just named the number 3 whiskey in the entire world by Whiskey Advocate. So I'm not just shilling these guys because they're a partner. They're a partner because they're awesome. And I feel really, really good about linking them up with what we're doing here on this show. It's needless to say, I'm stoked to be working with them. And one of the reasons I love their whiskey so much is that they're excellent pairings with a good cigar. And speaking of, we do have our own special release of cigars that you can purchase at a terrific price as a listener of the show. Until now, you've been able to order your own bundle of 10 stogies for just $169, which is less than half of what this blend sells for in cigars on the open market. A number of you sent us pictures of the Cigar Thought stogies that you either gave or received as gifts, which is just awesome. And because it's the holiday season, we lowered the price to just $149, and we've decided to keep it there for a while. That's right, only $149 for a bundle of 10. As many of you know, we partnered with one of the most prestigious cigar manufacturers in the world to release these official Cigar Thought cigars, which you can order directly from cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Just follow the link on the show page to get these easy-to-smoke stogies rolled with 13-year aged premium Dominican tobacco leaf, or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram and we'll send you the details directly. And the cigars, they come with a Bovita humidification pack and a Mylar storage bag to make sure they stay fresh whether you have a humidor or not. Now listen, the Seahawks, man, they just can't figure out how to stay bad. It's funny, last week we had the Ringer's Ben Solak on, and he was bemoaning how unfair it is that after the Russell Wilson trade, the Seahawks were finally supposed to go away. But instead, they made the playoffs in year one of the rebuild, and now here they are, knocking on those same doors again. They're here because Geno Smith and company led a game-winning touchdown drive in the final minutes, his fourth of the season if you can believe it, and Seattle snuck out of Tennessee with a 20-17 win over the Titans. At 8-7, they now control their own path to the postseason, but this team is far from perfect. That's why we reached out to one of our favorite guests. He brings a rare understanding of football schemes and analytics to the Seattle Overload podcast with Matty Brown, and shares some of his insights on Twitter as C. Mike's Spin Move. He is the brilliant Griffin Sturgeon. Griff, thanks for coming on board.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to chit-chat.
Yeah, we are too. All right, man. There's a lot I want to talk about with you today, but let's start with that game in Tennessee on Christmas Eve. You know, it was almost jarring how similar it was to the win over the Eagles the week before, with Seattle playing what appeared to me to be rather uninspiring football for half a game before ratcheting things up in the second half. Culminated, of course, with Geno Smith leading a game-winning march, throwing the go-ahead touchdown to Colby Parkinson with less than a minute left. Much of the conversation around that game will focus on those final few minutes, but zooming back out a little bit, what were your main takeaways after that game ended?
After I tried to let the in-game emotion kind of settle, my thing was 10 a.m. road game, get the hell out of Tennessee with a win, and then kind of just find your footing again and then go play the Steelers. That was kind of my overarching maybe ethos perspective for that game. Now the details certainly signal certain things, right? Positive and negative. But I was really thinking, like, after the really frustrating first half, I kept assuming things are probably going to like regress to the mean here. They're probably going to come away with the win. I don't know how comfortable it will be. I wanted it to be more comfortable than it was. I thought they'd get more drives in the second half to put up more points. They only got 3. Thankfully, they were really efficient with them.
Yeah, no kidding.
But after that first half, I was like, just win. And I don't think how they win or how they lose this game is really going to affect their chances of beating or losing to the Steelers. I just kind of viewed it as its own little bubble of a game. That's not to dismiss, how they won, right? That's not to dismiss how they could have won more. But it quickly just kind of became like, this is its own little like bubble game. Just get out with a W. I wanted them to go in and blow them out, right?
Of course.
We all did. And they're playing a bad team and an injured team. But they're also playing, Mike Vrabel, who's kind of maybe fighting for his job. Maybe some of those players are fighting for their job. It's kind of the point of no return. This is their last push. It's their last counteroffensive for the soul of that Titans team. And they came out with their best punch. And the Seahawks did not come out with their best punch. And then the Seahawks still were able to overcome that just by virtue of them just kind of, for lack of a better phrase, just getting their shit together. Yeah. And they were able to endure what the Titans were throwing at them. And it kind of showed like finally the talent disparity like revealed itself. And they came away with the win. So,
yeah, I share a lot of those same sentiments. I want to follow up on a couple of those things with you here in a second. But like for me, to the Vrabel point, one of the things I wrote in the article is in a league full of uncertainty, one of the things you can count on is that Mike Vrabel is going to drag you into the mud. And another thing you can count on is that Pete Carroll is going to be willing to meet you there. And and that's what happened, right? Like the talent disparity, especially with all the injuries that Tennessee was dealing with, should have dictated, I think, a more comfortable win. But when we start getting caught up in style points, we lose perspective of how hard it is to win in the NFL and how every season and really almost every week we see supposedly bad teams beat supposedly good teams. And that's because everyone in the NFL is really fucking good at football. And if you are the quote unquote better team and don't have your best stuff, which is most games, then you're susceptible to getting beat by anybody. And 60 minutes isn't really that large of a sample size to let, increased talent win out, especially when there's as few drives in the game as this one. I think each team had 7 total offensive drives in this game. Titans might've finished with 8, but, one of the things that you mentioned there is, and my overall point with that is like, okay, let's quibble about some of the stuff. And you and I are going to quibble about some of the stuff in that game. But like,
sure, if
you're an NFL fan, you're going to average 8 or 9 days a year out of 365 where your team wins. And like, I just am not the type of person that's going to waste one of those days, being mad. Like, yeah, there's some stuff I want to see get better, but they won. NFL wins are hard. And when it comes to dishing out playoff spots at the end of the season, all of those wins spend the same. This isn't college. You're not trying to impress voters. So, but one of the things that you said was the first half was frustrating to you. What specifically frustrated you in the first half of that game?
I think ultimately it was execution. Now that points to players, but it's also on the coaching staff to prepare the players to get them to play up to their talent level. We see that every year where, you have theoretically a talented roster. They don't win, they get fired. You bring in a new coach, and it's like 70% of the same players on that team like find a new life and they go win 10, 11 games or whatever, right? Like that. It doesn't happen every year, but it happens enough for where you can point to that. What I was mostly disappointed by was I thought after a good game of protection against a really good Eagles front, and then I think actually kind of doing okay considering they were playing the Niners the week before. Mm-hmm. And, with Lucas finally getting back in the lineup, you've got all 5 starters out there, at least 4 or 5. I was thinking, okay, they should be able to block the Tennessee Titans. They have Simmons and Danico Autry. Was Simmons even playing? I don't even remember.
Nope.
Yeah, so it was just Autry. So they don't have a front right now. And the guys are just getting pummeled. It's like, what's going on? Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross are getting bull rushed right now. And that did disrupt some of their ability to operate. And as it comes to like, judging the game plan or whatever, that does require some controlling for like, okay, well, what is the structure of the play call versus the structure of the defensive call? Is it a good call versus what does the O-line even afford you to do? Now, again, a good offensive coordinator, a really good offensive game plan can mitigate some of those things. So it's a little give and take. That's not to put it all on the O-line. But so it was just frustrating. And really, like I tweeted this during the game, and my impression was just like, and it's rich for me sitting on my couch to use this phrasing about like some of the best athletes on the planet, but I'm like, they just need to pull their head out of their collective ass here and just straighten out. And that was kind of, I know that's like wishy-washy, like really subjective. What does that even mean? But I just felt like they just needed to get a kick in the pants and get rolling. And then that was my main thing. I think part of that was because I was hesitating to say, well, the play calls certainly aren't working. Does that mean the play calls are bad? Is the O-line really matter that much here, or does it? Like I really wasn't picking a side, and I was just waiting. I was like, okay, surely next drive. And one of those drives in the second half, they were rolling, but then there was that weird ball placement or the weird challenge with Bobo's catch. I thought they definitely were going to come away with points on that drive. Mm-hmm. I thought they were going to convert that 4th down, that 4th and 1 that they didn't end up getting. But primarily, I think I was I was erring on the side of execution being the problem, with I think maybe the second bullet point on my list of concerns being, okay, but why is the coaching staff not getting them ready to execute a otherwise possibly fine enough game plan?
Yeah, it's something where it's tough, because what we want to see, especially when you have a team with what I think you and I both believe is a good quarterback, borderline great wide receivers, and an offensive line that's been effective when healthy, good running backs, like the talent is there for them to score a lot of points. And when you see 6 points at halftime, and you see the Titans just having double-digit play drives after double-digit play drives, okay, it's only 10-6. My disappointment in how the offense was playing kind of made me overlook how good the defense really was. I mean, Jordan Brooks got hurt early in that game, and look, he's not a perfect middle linebacker, but he's pretty good. And you saw that Tennessee smelled blood after he hurt himself, and he was out for the rest of the game. I think the injury happened late first quarter. Well, it was just Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears over and over and over and over again for the rest of the half and early into the third quarter. And it was working, but Seattle kept them, for the most part, off the scoreboard, and they kept the game close, right? Like, they didn't let Tennessee get out to arm's reach where they could really throw some big punches. They kept the game in the clinch, and that's a credit to the defense on that, I think, because Tennessee ran for a bunch of yards, but at the end of the day, they had 287 total yards on 64 plays. Like, I thought the defense did really well. And then by the time, halftime rolls around, they only get the 3 second half drives. They score 14 points on those 3 drives. That's really impressive. You look and you say, they scored 20 points in a game. That's not very good, right? If you score 20 points every game all season long, you're going to end up winning 3 to 5 games. But points per game is not the best way to, it's almost a lazy way to look at how well an offense is playing. I have always been a huge fan of points per drive. And Seahawks, like we mentioned, only had 7 offensive possessions in that game. They scored 20 points. That's almost 3 points per drive. The NFL average this year is 1.88 points per drive. So they were 50% better, more than that, 60% better than league average in that game. So in that sense, the offense did end up being pretty effective overall. And I think a lot of that had to do with how well Geno Smith played, because early in the game, he was dealing with a lot of pressure. And yet, even though his numbers weren't eye-popping, I think he had 227 yards, 25 of 36, had a couple touchdowns, no interceptions. That's really efficient. He's getting almost 8 yards per pass attempt. He's got a pass rating 105, a QBR of 75. Those are numbers that are good enough to win.
Yep, agree. Yeah, and you mentioned the points per drive figure. Like, that's so important, because it's really how we should view the whole concept of points, like you were saying. And and this is going to be part of the other discussion that we'll have, but you've mentioned how great the Seahawks are on their opening script, especially their opening drive. They almost always score on that first drive. If they go into Tennessee and with only 7 drives, and they just happen to have an opening drive that works, they put up 27. 27 feels way different than 20.
Right.
And that's still on the same number of drives. And so I chalk that up to, the Titans are fighting for the soul of their team right now. And Vrabel, over that Belichick tree, they do game plan really well. That was the extent of their bag of tricks. They were able to stop the Seahawks with the extent of their, precise game planning, their trickeration really on both sides of the ball. And they were able to kind of steal some points, cut that margin.
And they're a super disciplined team.
Definitely. So it was kind of like an underdog who had a lot of fight in them. They were able to kind of bring the Seahawks to their knees contextually. And you kind of just have to tip your hat. But then at the end of the day, still 20 points, 7 drives. That's more points. That is equivalent to the amount of points per drives that the league leading offense is scoring right now. The Dallas Cowboys 2.85 per drive. So just to put those 20 points into perspective, I mean, the first half you could say from a purely analytical standpoint, it's just variance. And then variance normalized in the second half. And then that's why the whole concept of averages exists. The average over the course of the whole sample was really good offensively. Maybe you did what you should have done to a really bad defense anyway, and had those points come more evenly, distributed more evenly over, of course, the same number of drives, say they scored, 2 of those scoring drives came in the first half and only 2 of them came in the second half. Say you get 1 field goal out of one of those drives that were, maybe some refs, the officiating affected, maybe you feel different about it, but again, like you said, like 7 drives really isn't a lot of data. But in the aggregate, they still did quite a bit with those 7 drives. So,
yeah. And I think a big reason that they did is, man, it's coming together with these receivers. Seattle now has 3 wide receivers that are earning robust target shares in this offense. Yeah. And the fans of every team wants 3 good wide receivers. It's so rare to have 3 good wide receivers. Almost no team has it. And to see, we know how good Tyler Lockett has been. He's going to have some spike games, but it's just the consistency year over year. He's going to have 1,000 to 1,300 yards. He's going to score 8 to 10 touchdowns. He's going to have 70 to 100 catches. Like, that consistency is just there. Then you've got DK Metcalf, who's more of a, atom bomb, right?
he's the big red button.
He's the big red button. Exactly. And he can do those amazing things like he did against the Eagles. Obviously, he had that insane final drive. And then, which I think was the best he'd ever played in his career, was on that final drive. He had that one catch in the first half where he caught the little kind of dig route to the left and then immediately, like coming out of a break, hurtled a defender. Like, it's one thing to be running full speed and kind of time your jump, but he was like changing directions and hurtled that guy. And he has been honestly one of the most productive receivers in the NFL since working through the hip and the rib injuries. His overall numbers are going to be a little bit dampened because he was just playing through so much pain early in the season. He's looking great right now. But it's Jackson Smith and Jigba that I think is really starting to unlock some things. And you saw it on that final drive. They had 2 big completions to JSN on that one, including the 3rd and 14, where it was just a trust throw from Geno over the middle. It's a slant, but like a deeper slant, not quite a crosser. It was almost an in between those 2 routes. And that's a tough throw, middle of the field, 15 yards through traffic. It's one where you have to trust your receiver. And for a guy who's playing in his 12th, 13th game ever in the NFL, to earn that target is huge. And then the other thing is, one of the things we like to talk about a lot on this show, and we're not unique in this way, but I think it's really important, is the concept of earning targets. You don't end up with a bunch of targets over the course of a game or the course of a season by accident, right? You have to earn the play caller's trust to make you one of the first 2 reads in a play, and you have to have the quarterback's trust. And those high leverage targets, there's a reason they've always gone to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. It's why they always went to Doug Baldwin before that. Those are trust throws. And then at the end of the game, you have a 1 read, game on the line, stick route to Colby Parkinson in the end zone.
Yeah.
Like, these are trust throws to guys who aren't the 2 main attractions in this offense.
Right. Insane stuff. The Jacson throw, like you said, that is just win, baby. Like that is, you just need to win your route. You need to out execute. You need to go get a bucket. It's James Harden, ISO. Everyone get the hell out of the way.
Yes, it is.
He's either going to drive or he's going to step back 3. Like, you just got to be better. And a lot of these game-winning drives, they've just been better, and it's reflective of the talent, and then that is then reflective of the overall ceiling and capability of this team. Barring the 49ers, I think in the NFC they can beat anybody. And we'll see with San Francisco, but I never want to say never. But they can play, and a lot of those game-winning drives, you start to see more like 2-man coverage, and this receiving core is built to destroy 2-man. And so, the Jacson throw was insane. Throw and catch, that was like Geno back at West Virginia.
Yeah.
They had a bunch of receivers that win in that specific way, and it's like spread it out, find the matchup, and just rip it. And he ripped it, and Jacson caught it. And like Jacson, it's hard to see on the broadcast, the tape hasn't come out yet, but like Jacson dusted that guy. And Geno trusted that he was going to dust him because he's playing with inside leverage, inside trail. He's trusting that Jackson's going to win over the top of him, basically.
Which is so hard to do. It is so hard to win a middle of the field route over the top of a defender as opposed to cutting underneath it. It's like fighting through a screen in basketball versus slipping underneath it.
It's beating the physics of what the defense already has the advantage on. Like, So it's insane. And Geno put it on a spot. He's like, I know Jackson's gonna, out of his speed cut, is gonna win this. And sure enough, he did. And then like on the other parts of the drive, 2-man, inside leverage, Lockett is gonna win with his outside breaking out route every time. And he did it on the the 5-yard like Omaha out, and then like the 10-12 yard sail route. It's just at different depths, and they just won. And the reason why they're playing 2-man to tie it all together is because what's the first thing you're defending when you call 2-man? You're defending the sideline. You're defending the go ball. They're afraid of DK first and foremost. So DK's presence on the field is dictating the coverage from which you are then able to work the remaining matchups, and that's Tyler and Jacson. So this 3-receiver trio, it's like, and the O-line protected well. So it's just good enough, right? The O-line was just good enough on the opening drive. So that then shows you like what this, not just 3 receivers that are good, but 3 skill sets that complement each other really well. And like no one can stop them when they're in those moments. I mean, they've even when they didn't win the game, the Rams game, where they still got down there, and the field goal was missed, they still drove. The Bengals game, where they failed in the red zone, they still drove down the field in the same moment against the same more or less coverage. So I mean, it's like you got to keep the Seahawks offense out of those situations the most you can. So
you and I saw the same tweet, and I always kills me when I'm not prepared to credit the tweeter, but I think it might have been a snapshot maybe of a Brady Henderson article, but it was talking about how Geno Smith has tied the NFL record with 4 game-winning drives in the final minute in one season.
That's insane.
Like, and the fact that Locke did it in his one chance too, really speaks to how effective this team can be in those high leverage situations late in the game, which almost begs the question, why not build the whole plane out of that?
Yeah.
And you know what? Let's use that to transition into what I really want to talk with you about, which is Shane Waldron, because one of the things I'm grateful for within the kind of universe of doing this podcast and following the Seahawks on Twitter and all of these things is that I get to discourse with really smart people like yourself. And you and I have had some Twitter DM conversations going on over the last number of years, but we've picked up in frequency recently talking about Shane Waldron. And you had some thoughts on him that I think were a good check for me, because like I said, this is one of the reasons I was most excited to have you on the show, because I want to take this off the record conversation, put it on the record, and give it a little bit of oxygen. Anyone who's been reading Cigar Thoughts or listening to the show over the last couple of years knows that I was pretty pro Waldron last year, and for a good reason. I mean, Seattle just outperformed all expectations on offense, and they seemed creative, different packages, pre-snap motion, all the stuff that I've been begging for years. Yeah. But that view's drifted towards ambivalence as this season has worn on. You've remained a bit more optimistic regarding Seattle's offensive coordinator, so I wanted to hash some of that out with you here. I'll give you the floor to start. Tell me about Shane Waldron and your overall opinion of him as Seattle's OC.
Yeah, I'm not a Waldron guy per se. Like he's not like one of those guys where, everyone has like outlier opinions on certain players and coaches, like, oh, I swear by him and stuff. That's really not where I'm coming at with him. I don't think like he's this secret genius being undone by X, Y, and Z factors. I think, we probably agree on most of him, is in that like he's the general philosophy of his offense is sound. He kind of lives in the Waldron Shanahan world for the most part, with some adaptations, perhaps good and bad. I think that like he knows he's got DK Metcalf. He knows he has Tyler Lockett. Like he certainly schemes like it. He's been able to show that he can transition an efficient offense from a healthy Russell Wilson to a different style quarterback in Geno and build the offense accordingly. That's not to say again that there aren't details to nitpick and everything, but generally speaking, I think like, okay, he's fine. My criticisms of him, I certainly have criticisms of him. I think the main thing is how much that I ask this, and not rhetorically, like I ask it sincerely, how much do they matter? Because basically, like right now, the Seahawks this year, in the aggregate, are the 11th ranked offense. So for all of our misgivings, we're still talking about the 11th ranked offense with an offensive line that is like bottom 5 and potentially finally climbing out of the cellar there. They're potentially getting better. They were only bottom 5 because your best players weren't playing. Like players matter, right? But so within that 11th ranked offense on early downs, they are an elite offense. They are right up there with the Kyle Shanahan led 49ers and the Mike McDaniel led Dolphins, the Josh Allen led Bills. Like, they are clustered with
crazy.
These teams.
They're like legit top 5 early down splits.
Right. So like whatever he is doing on early downs, whatever he isn't doing on early downs, he's good enough to be up there. And however, whatever fundamental failures of that he has as a play caller, it doesn't reveal itself on the early downs.
Right.
But then in sharp contrast to the early downs, the third downs are as bad as the early downs are good. Like, they're just abysmal on third downs. And so,
except in the 2-minute, 4-minute offense, they're really good on third downs.
Yeah, they're good there, and like you said on opening scripts, they're good on third downs. But the last month, their third downs are like, I think EPA is 9th and success rate is like 5th or something.
That's wild.
So they're finally getting it together, but that correlates incredibly cleanly with the offensive line's yielded pressure rate being 20th or better, and it's like, if the pressure rate is merely north of 21 ranked, the third downs go from bottom 5 to like 10, 12, 9th, 8th, whatever. But it's like a huge, like, you completely flip the table, their placement on the chart. So my criticism then is, when the O-line is really bad, he compounds the problem. He makes it worse than it needs to be. When the protection is merely meeting the threshold of operability, he's pretty much getting all that there is to get out of it. So my question is, as far as improving that, is it more likely that a replacement OC keeps the early downs as good and improves the third downs with similar protection circumstances? Or is it more likely that the O-line simply just gets better by virtue of guys getting healthy and, there's some positive regression there with regard to injury luck, and then everything else just falls into place? Because we have the first 13 weeks of 2022, I think Ben Baldwin's, where he combines all the different companies' charting and statistics for their O-line rank. They were like 14th ranked O-line the first 13 weeks of 2022. Their third down EPA was 9th. Mm-hmm. And then after that point, the O-line tanks because there's some injuries to the guards and the rookies hit the rookie wall. Third down falls to bottom 5. So clear-cut correlation. This year, for really the first 11, 12 weeks, the O-line is bottom 5. The third downs are bottom 5. As the O-line by Sports Info Solutions pressure rate climbs to 20th instead of 32nd, the third down performance skyrockets to 5th in success rate.
Wild.
So it's very sinusoidal. And so my thing is like, all right, next year, as far as fixing this goes, I would just rather bank on assuming the O-line gets healthy, and then you get to keep all the fun stuff on early downs. Again, you can nitpick. I certainly have my nitpicks, but that's kind of what it comes down to for me. There's also the other component of like, maybe look at the positional coaching staff. That doesn't necessarily mean fire anybody, but maybe hire a different voice, or hire someone to add to the staff. Obviously,
dude, they run messy routes. I'm just gonna say it. They run messy routes.
And the choreography of how, like, even like the individual routes themselves, there's that conversation, but then how they relate to one another, the timing of it, like that.
And that's what I'm talking about. I do want to specify, sorry to cut you off. I do want to specify.
No, you're fine.
When I say they're running messy routes, I don't mean from a technical proficiency standpoint. Tyler Lockett's an excellent route runner. Jacson Smith and Jigba is really starting to show what made him so attractive as a prospect with his route running. DK continues to refine his ability to run routes. I'm talking about like the spacing and the layering and how often there just isn't okay, here comes pressure, here's a bailout route for Geno. How often he's looking to make a 15-yard throw and there's 2 receivers that are 5 yards away from each other, which brings 3 different defenders into the throw. That kind of stuff. Right. That's not so, to me, not so much an indictment of the talent that's on the field. It's the conceptual stuff. And maybe that's Shane Waldron, maybe it's Sanjay Lal, the wide receiver coach, but that kind of stuff makes it tough on a quarterback and on an offense.
Right. And I totally agree with you. When you look at the Sean McVay Rams, they are so, like, when you talk about the things that are within the receiver's control, it's like a choreography ballet. Like everyone, like every precise step, the things that don't require your receiver tight end to even be good per se, It's just they're all perfect. The timing and the rhythm of it is perfect so often. Like you even have like the depth receivers just always in the right spot and everything. Even if they're not winning their route per se, it's the timing of it for the guy who is winning his route isn't undone because the all the auxiliary players are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if you look at those staffs, they are monster staffs because McVay is there, because Shanahan is there. They can attract whoever they want to go help them coach receivers. I think some of the coaches that have come from that tree are experiencing a little bit of coaching drain. They get thinned out. Shane Waldron in Seattle only has Andy Dickerson. Sanjay Lal comes from a different tree, from different guys. Pat McPherson, I think, is probably a good tight ends coach, but he's been in Seattle under Bevel and Shoddy and just different minds. So stuff like that probably matters, and that's kind of like my frustrations there. The first thing I would do, putting on my fan fiction hat, would be, well, go get a receiver coach or maybe a passing game coordinator or whatever their title is. They can do different things in the building regardless of what their title is. Get someone else from that tree who speaks the same language so that Waldron isn't having to, either one, he's being helped by this person, but then simultaneously he doesn't have to spend as much time delegating. He can just kind of have some salutary neglect for that guy. Because I think Sanjay Lal is probably a very good receiver trainer. Like he's very detailed with the individual performance of players. I think it's maybe where they're missing is, again, how does this route fit into the timing of that route for the sake of the whole concept? Because a lot of where they're messing up, the play call itself on paper is identical to what you see around the league, but then their performance of how, again, the rhythm, the timing, how the routes relate to one another is lacking. So to me, that isn't that's not a lack of ideas. That's not a lack of on paper X and O acumen. That's just the actual hands-on application of the coaching of the call.
Yeah.
Where I think there are some shortcomings. And it especially seems to show up more on third downs, where that stuff matters more when the O-line doesn't give you any margin for error. Mm-hmm. And maybe it is equally bad on early downs, but because the protection is just good enough, there's margin for error there.
There's the threat of the run on early downs that doesn't necessarily exist on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10. Exactly.
So it's the problems rear their ugly head the most in pure passing situations. And it's one way to solve that in a roundabout way is improve the protection so it doesn't matter as much. That doesn't mean you still shouldn't try to fix part of the root problem, though.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100% on that. And, one of the things that we were talking about, I think just 2-3 days ago, one of the things that I really enjoyed watching Shane Waldron do in 2022 was a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. And again, that means one running back and either 2 or 3 tight ends. And there was so much creativity. I mean, in 2022, the tight ends had over 1,000 receiving yards. They were one of 5 or 6 tight end groups to have that amount of production. It's just everyone had 300 something yards between Disley and Parkinson, Noah Fant. But now you go and you use a 1st round pick on a close to consensus number 1 wide receiver in this draft class. And I think one thing that, and this is, I wouldn't say necessarily a credit to Shane Waldron, but something that should be kept in mind when judging him is, okay, he went from running almost a league high percentage of plays with only 2 wide receivers on the field, and now he has to integrate a 3rd. That is a fundamental philosophical change. Now you're running way more 11 personnel because you're not going to keep Jacson, Smith, and Jigba on the sidelines. Well, concepts are different. Protection is different. You got 1 or 2 fewer blockers or potential blockers in there. You have 1 or 2 fewer short range kind of bailout targets, slip screens to the tight ends that we saw them run a ton in 2022. They bring a tight end across the formation and fake a handoff, move the pocket, get Geno out into, onto the hash and throw these little slip screens in the flat. They were so effective with that in 2022. We haven't seen that this year. And I don't think that part is necessarily regression on Waldron's part. It's figuring out, okay, how do I change this from being Will Disley or Colby Parkinson out there as the second tight end to here's a totally different type of player in Jacson, Smith, and Jigba?
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. And I think this is a sneaky thing that is at the root of what we that perception we have, like when we're watching the games and when they're not scoring points, and the word that we all use is this feels disjointed. Like that's kind of the word that we use, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the underlying cause to that like phenomenon is that Sean McVay, I'm using McVay specifically because that's where Waldron came from directly. Sean McVay has spent years in 11 and years in 12, primarily 11. But when he's been in 12, it was like 80% 12 personnel and 20% 11. When he was an 11 team, it was like 80% 11. What McVay is doing is he is splitting more. He's more like 60-40, and he's being progressively more 11 in the past, month and a half because he wants to get Jacson involved. But that is great because just on paper, it's like, well, yeah, personnel diversity, formation diversity, cool, great, But I think the problem there is that when it can become a problem is that as you transition from 11 personnel grouping within a series or within a drive and 12 personnel grouping series to series and drive, is that the plays within 11 don't relate to the plays within 12. Mm-hmm. So the sequencing, they don't tie together. So as you transition away from 11 within one drive to 12, you're setting up future 11 on the next series or drive. You're setting up, the 12 is setting up later 12 personnel usage at another drive. When you don't convert on third down and you reflect back on the previous play calls and you think those things had nothing to do with each other, that's correct. But it's not a problem if you convert, because then you get into the next package where you can continue to layer your sequencing. So that is different from the McVay offense in its purest form because he stays in one personnel.
And for just for context here, just a reminder to those listening, Shane Waldron was a coach with Sean McVay. Yeah. I mean, part of the appeal of bringing him over was integrating some of these McVay concepts in Seattle's offense.
For sure. So it's like when things are rolling, when things work, it's great because it's like, oh, they're doing all sorts of stuff and it works. When they can't convert on third downs and sustain drives, it feels disjointed because the 11 person, the play calls, the play calls that follow each other don't necessarily relate to one another because you can't get into more of that game plan that unfurls until you get more series, till you get more drives. And I think that is where, he's having trouble. I think it makes the things that aren't working look even worse than perhaps they are because of that principle. Now, I don't think we're going to have that problem moving forward because just looking at contracts and stuff, they're probably not going to be able to keep all three of these tight ends. And then you also simultaneously want to get Jacson more involved. They're going to be an 11 personnel team. And I think the sequencing will continue to feel like it makes more sense. Even when they aren't executing, perhaps the feel of it will be better. But yeah, it's Nate Tice and Matty Brown have both used the term like siloed offense. Like 12 personnel is its own silo of offense. 11 personnel is its own silo of offense. And when you see both silos in the same drive, they don't relate to one another, and you simply need to convert so that you can continue to see each silo layer in its sequencing. When it works, it looks awesome. When it doesn't work, it's like, what is this?
Yeah.
Type of feel to it.
All right. So you've mentioned McVay, you've mentioned Kyle Shanahan. Right now, Mike McDaniel's right there in terms of the guys, and these are head coaches where we think about these are the cutting edge offenses. These are the offenses that are scariest. You also have Ben Johnson in Detroit, Todd Monken in Baltimore and all that. But right now, I think consensus around the league is we're seeing, and this is of course against the backdrop of the 49ers getting their butts whipped last night. But I think that if you were to poll everyone who, really analyzes the NFL, Kyle Shanahan is going to be the one that most people point to as running the most effective offense in the NFL right now. I mean, they're
unfortunately,
they're just obliterating expectations for efficiency, right? I mean, you got Brock Purdy, even after last night, he's still almost averaging 10 yards per pass attempt. That doesn't make sense, right? I mean,
on a run first offense.
Yeah. If you average 8.5, you're going to lead the NFL in yards per attempt most years. And he's like a standard deviation above that. Right. So, you had a tweet that I responded to during the game against Tennessee where you're saying, Kyle Shanahan is running all of the same stuff that Shane Waldron is, and that if I'm reading that tweet correctly, you're saying the difference is in execution. And while I don't think that's wrong, my take on that, and please clarify if necessary, is that yeah, Kyle Shanahan does all of that stuff. He also does a whole lot of other stuff. It's like a golfer who, Shane Waldron's playing a draw, right? He's hitting his ball right to left with every club, and he knows how to play that tendency in his swing. Kyle Shanahan can also hit a draw, but he can also hit a fade. He can also hit the stinger. He can also hit those little flop shots. Like, he has more shots in his bag than Shane Waldron does. Am I missing your point there? Because it felt to me like that tweet was kind of selling the difference between Waldron and Shanahan short.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's always play calls, right? And then there's application of the play calls too. The sequencing and, the game planning it, like the timeliness of it all, right? While I certainly think Shanahan is head and shoulders, better than Waldron, I just don't necessarily think the source of their problems is a lack of ideas or even the right ideas. And that doesn't mean there can't be better ideas, but then, I hate to be a broken record, but my mind does float back to the early down, late down discrepancy. If there's a lack of ideas, a lack of, conceptual breadth, it doesn't seem to matter on early downs, just because, again, like, they're so good on early downs. I mean, they're pretty much as good as the Dolphins and Bills, but then all three of those teams, including the Seahawks, are then doubled by the 49ers still. But in terms of the rank, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the top 4 teams. So that doesn't mean he can't be better. I think another issue here, why the early down performance still isn't leading to more points, at least, before leading up to the Cowboys game, is that they're not hitting their field tilting explosives. Mm-hmm. And that's because I think the O-line is preventing them from going deep and going deep successfully as often. I think that's another hidden variable. The 49ers do have a weak O-line, but it's still considerably better than the Seahawks protection-wise. Mm-hmm. And it's better just enough so that they can still hit their explosives. Now, they don't hit field tilting explosives either. They hit those 18 to 22 yarders at an absurd rate. Because Brandon Ayuk just gets open every time. Like,
he's so good.
I can't believe what I'm looking at. He's gone from like a wide receiver 3 caliber player to, honestly, he's knocking on the door of being like Cooper Kupp at this point. Yeah. I mean, he's really that good, and I can't believe what I'm watching.
In a different offense where you didn't also have Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel and George Kittle to throw the ball to. Like, if he was on the Vikings instead of Justin Jefferson, I'm not saying he's putting up Justin Jefferson numbers, but he's probably not too far off of it. He's that good.
Right. Yeah, he really is. And that's like part of this here. It's just like, this is what Shanahan does when he also has the best skill group in the NFL. Mm-hmm. It's, like he's not had the best skill group in the NFL before, and the results have been commensurate. They've been the 7th or 8th best offense instead. That doesn't make Shanahan any less of a coach. It's just, as you incrementally improve that skill group, eventually he's going to get you the best offense in the league with it, even with Brock Purdy and Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, well, so, let's stay there. Let's stay there because the 49ers finally got whipped, right? Like, they've been the Death Star all year. Even when they lost those 3 games in a row, there's mitigating circumstances you can point to, but they weren't getting thumped. And they got thumped last night. Brock Purdy, who entered the game as the prohibitive MVP favorite, is now 3rd. After throwing no touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and maybe possibly getting benched after a stinger, even though it was reported he could come back in. So my question to you on that is, how much of the 49ers success, and I'm not talking about this necessarily just like feed the hashtag discourse, but because I view the 49ers as the standard that fans of every team should be holding their team to. Like, the goal is to be the best. And we have a very clear example of what the best offense in the NFL looks like.
Yeah.
The Seahawks have a pretty good quarterback. The 49ers have a pretty good quarterback. A pretty good quarterback that might win MVP. How good is Brock Purdy versus how good is the Shanahan offense?
Yeah. I was a Purdy hater last year. I thought what I was seeing was just fake. It's just Shanahan smoke and mirrors. It's not real. He can't hurt you. It's not real. And then this year happened, and I do think he also is intrinsically better, which, lo and behold, that's what happens. A young player gets better year to year, especially if you have a full camp with the ones, et cetera. I think bereft of all context, if you try to isolate the quarterback himself, I think he's probably like in that 11 to 14 range of quarterbacks in terms of rank. I'm not that impressed with his skill set. Like if you just strip him down to his constituent parts, I don't think he's working with a whole lot that is impressive. Now, the great equalizer is always the stuff that you can't like point to as easily, like decision making, timing, rhythm, et cetera.
It's a very good timing passer.
The cerebral part of the game. And I agree that he is a good timing thrower, but I think that is even can be qualified to, he's good at timing throws when it's like the whole play is predicated on like a 1 or 2 read thing, and it's like it's going to work, put it to a spot, kind of like Tua in the Dolphins. But I would say Tua's even better at that than Brock. I think Brock's accuracy can kind of be all over the place. I think that there's so much margin for error, and coming from 2 directions. One, the receivers, the average separation, the average like first read being open charting and stuff, it matches the tape, is like the 49ers are lapping everybody. And then when they aren't open, the receivers are incredibly good at the catch point. Everyone can turn back to the ball and catch it and snag it out of the air. and the numbers there are such. Bryce Rossler put out an article for Sports Info Solutions. Those numbers are so incredibly high, the contested catch, that it's like doomed to regress. Like there's no way. It's like Sam Haggerty's batting average last year. His batting average on balls in play, like that number is going to fall eventually. Like it can't stay up that. And the 49ers can even continue to lead the league in it next year, but it's still going to fall to the point where
they'll come back to the pack a little bit.
Efficient.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just like, it's one of those things where we're seeing it in LA, right? Like I think Jared Goff is a pretty good quarterback, but there was a ceiling on the Rams, which is why they jettisoned him for their the hero shot with Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford comes in and they win a Super Bowl. And like every week, Matt Stafford is putting throws on tape that, maybe 2-3 people on the planet can do. He's amazing. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, Brock Purdy is good enough to win a Super Bowl with this 49ers combination of talent and scheme. Yeah. It's so scary to think about what a real excellent quarterback like a Matt Stafford, or honestly, like I think Kirk Cousins is like obliterating what Brock Purdy is doing if he's in this offense, right? And so it's like I think Geno is putting up very similar, if not maybe better numbers in this offense, just based on the strengths of it. But the fact that the 49ers just can't win from behind is a little bit of an indictment, because they don't trust Brock Purdy to drop back down 2 scores in the fourth quarter and just say, okay, you know what? They know we're passing, and so we're going to run these multi-level deep throws. That works when the running game is working, when the slip screens are working, and the bubble screens and all of that stuff. Then you can open up. But when defense knows you're passing, there's limitations there. Now, I want to bring it back to Seattle here real quick before we move forward to the Steelers game. Talking about Shane Waldron, do you want to see him calling plays for Seattle in 2024?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
I would bring him back. I just think I always err on the side of, I think the right answer is often the most boring one. But I mean, he still needs to like finish strong here. If they have 2 more games, and say they even get to the playoffs, and they have 3 more games where they're moving the ball outside of the red zone at will, they're moving the ball well in early downs, but like the third downs regress again, and they can't score in the red zone, they're only coming away with field goals, then it's like, all right, I love how high the floor is, but I also don't want to waste the ceiling. If Pete fires him because he'll think it'd be the right thing to do, I'll go along with that. I won't be like, oh, Pete, don't do that, like the way I was when they fired Shoddy. I didn't think that was necessary. If he fires him, I'll like defer to like as a fan deferring to the coach. I'll defer to him and be like, all right, that's clearly he thought it was necessary, so I'll go along with it. It means he has higher standards. All right, cool. If he doesn't, then I think he probably thinks the source problem is sourced to other things that he thinks he can correct, and it's not necessarily a Waldron thing. So it's very results-based perspective I have from here on out, but I err on the side of, yeah, let's bring him back.
I'm a little bit on the other side. Now, I'm not going to be like disappointed if Shane Waldron is offensive coordinator next year, because I think that I think he's very similar to Geno in that he is probably a better than Not probably. He's a better than average play caller. Seattle's efficiency, even with their struggles, even with O-line health. And look, I'm not necessarily giving Waldron a free pass. And maybe this is, I know you're not giving him a free pass either, but maybe one of the bigger discrepancies in how you and I view Shane Waldron is every single team in the NFL has an unhealthy offensive line in December. It's just, nobody is keeping all 5 of their offensive linemen healthy. We're seeing it. There's just a total dearth of O-line talent in the NFL. You have to be able to adapt to that. And Shane Waldron has not. Yes, they've been very good when the offensive line is healthy. There's no doubt there's a strong correlation there. But you can't count on that all season long. And to not have the counter punch when you're, giving up a higher pressure rate is a little alarming to me. I would like to see, just because for me, the biggest thing is we see a clear standard of what the best offenses in the NFL look like and how necessary that is to compete for a Super Bowl in the modern NFL. Don't know that Seattle is there. And I would be willing to risk the next guy is a little bit worse for the hope that he can go from second tier to first tier.
Yeah, I understand that. I will say, I feel like there is room for cautious optimism in the here and now, because like we talked about, 20 points in 7 drives is actually pretty good. He had a backup quarterback playing for 2 games prior to that. But then the game before that with his starter, they put up 35 points on the Cowboys, right? And they were good on third downs. Since week 10, their overall performance on third downs by EPA is like 11th, and their success rate is 16th. So they have improved there. Let's hope that continues.
11th and 16th. This defense isn't good enough, though, to be 11th or 16th to 16th on offense.
That's on third downs, though.
Okay.
That's only third downs. So, average third downs in junction with being 4th on early downs should add up to like an extra 5 points a game or whatever. I'll take average third downs personally for a whole season in junction with how good they are on early downs.
Fair enough.
Gets you
That's fair.
That probably gets you at least a minimum of 2 more field goals a game, 2 more sustained drives where you're at least getting 6 more points. So I'll take that. And third downs, third downs year to year are not sticky statistically, but early downs are. And so I would rather be good at the stable stuff than it be the inverse, where you're not good at the stable stuff, because then you don't know what you're getting into year to year, and it's indicative of the mainframe of your offense is healthy versus it being flying by the seat of your pants. So I think they are improving their problem areas. And again, it's correlating with the O-line getting healthy. So if the O-line can continue to be healthy, let's go put up 30 points on the Steelers. Let's go put up 30 points on the Cardinals, hopefully, and reassess. But I do think it's more than merit. It more than merits assessing as we go here. It's not like you've got a blank check. You can be as bad as you want type of thing because of the O-line. It's no, you got to keep the O-line. Part of the OC's job is to make sure that everyone's playing up to their potential, right? It's not just scheme; it's the actual coaching of these guys and all that. So
we were just talking Brock Purdy, who has pretty unassailable numbers for the most part, barring last night. But he is only 2nd in the NFL in yards per attempt. The juggernaut atop the leaderboard is one Mason Rudolph, who the Seahawks will see on Sunday.
Has he been announced the starter?
I believe he's been announced the starter for Sunday. Kenny Pickett's going to get some
Mason
reps
Rudolph
during the week, but Mason's going to be bearing the brunt of the snaps. And so, Griff, what are your first impressions of the Seahawks-Steelers matchup this coming weekend?
I'm afraid of any Mike Tomlin coach team. Tomlin is a lot like Carroll. He coaches to the circumstances always. His team refuses to lose. His team refuses to be as bad as they should be. We're kind of, his teams never, ever lose faith, ever.
They've never had a losing season. What is this, his 19th year? And this year was the year. Just like the Seahawks were supposed to suck last year and maybe suck this year, so were the Steelers, and here they are at 8-7. It's insane.
Yeah, agreed. I think they should win. They have to win, obviously, if they want to stay alive here. They need this win, not just for this year's chances, but kind of, everyone's breathing down Carroll's neck, right? And Geno's neck, and everyone's neck, really. So they need this win. I think that they can win. I don't care how it comes. Playing Mike Tomlin, I don't care how it comes. Just win.
You'll take 10-7 and you'll take 40-37.
Yeah, exactly. And now I still want to see, for the long-term picture, I want to see the O-line perform well relative to the expectations of facing that front. Like, they're probably not going to have a quote-unquote good game against TJ Watt and their other pass rushers who are really good. I'm blanking on their name right now. But at least do well relative to what can be expected. Like, maybe keep them below their season average of pressure production and sack production and stuff.
Man, if we've ever needed Abe Lucas in a game.
Yep.
TJ Watt might be the best defensive player on the planet.
He's incredibly good. And he can get pressure early. He can get pressure late in the snap. He's incredibly good, on the scramble drill too, like his pursuit. But this O-line, this team, this offense has showed you don't need to have good protection. You just need to have serviceable protection. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Like the Cowboys, they gave up a lot of pressure, but like the quality of pressure they surrendered was such that Geno could work with it, because look at what he did. He worked with it. There have been some games this year where he can't, like the Bengals game. He was just too much, and the extent of Geno's talent can't overcome that much pressure. And he still was getting hit as thrown that game all over the place. So just be good enough this game protection-wise, and I think everything else falls into place. I think we should expect them to win this game. I just don't think it will be a pretty win per se.
Let's talk about being good enough in protection. You've got TJ Watt, who almost exclusively rushes from the left side, which is where Abe Lucas is. If you're Shane Waldron, are you trusting Abe Lucas to win enough of those reps that you can keep him on an island? Or are you sacrificing a potential receiver to help block TJ Watt?
I think that we see some run heavier formations so that they can live in play action to slow the rush as much as possible. Shane Waldron does this where if you look at he calls a lot of play action in the aggregate, like top 5, I think. But if you look at when he calls it, he'll have a cluster of games where he's calling 10 plus play action dropbacks a game, and then followed by a 3-game cluster of calling like fewer than 6. He does this. He's been running quite a bit more on second downs recently.
He has.
And
I've noticed that.
Out of shotgun in particular. Now, some of
which I hate. I hate running out of shotgun. I hate it.
Well, I think it's a necessary evil, because if you don't run out of shotgun, then you can't call play action in a shotgun.
Totally agree. But
it's the timeliness of it.
That's
right?
That's it. I feel like running out of shotgun, you got to pick your spots. I don't think it should be the main source of your running plays, in my opinion.
Right. And some of these are RPOs, so it's dictated by the defense. Some of these are checks at the line, so it's dictated by Geno. Some of them, not all of them. That said, still, my, Coper's cope. I'm a coper. I'm an optimist, maybe to a fault. I think he's setting up like a deluge of shotgun play action on second down. I think it's about to come, because he hasn't called very much of it the last 2-3 games. I think we're about to see quite a bit of it. We might also see pistol.
I would love that, because I've been begging for a counterpunch from Shane Waldron all season.
Yeah, and he abandoned pistol a while ago, but he always comes back to stuff because that's how he operates. He likes to ebb and flow. We might see that like pistol sidecar thing out of 12 as well, which he's incredibly diverse out of. He's not predictable out of that thing at all, and we haven't seen it in a while. So I think that's another way to slow TJ Watt's keys. Like, just kill his first step and then live with the results. If you can slow his first step, his initial key, that's giving you a fighting chance. So that might mean chipping. That might mean losing another eligible receiver in the progression. But if it's slowing down TJ Watt, and you can play point and shoot with DK and Tyler on the perimeter, it's worth it. Just to give yourself enough time to do that. So, yeah, man.
Well, and look, on the other side of the ball, the Steelers are 8-7 despite atrocious quarterback play. Small sample size, Mason Rudolph notwithstanding. He had a great one game. The overall picture of Mason Rudolph is not intimidating. But this is a team with, we talked about how rare it is to have 3 really good receiving options. The Steelers have 3 really good receiving options. George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth. How do you feel about this defense's ability to keep those guys? Because the way the Steelers won last week is they flipped the field constantly. They got a ton of big plays, and it was a George Pickens game. He had almost 200 yards receiving, I think, on just 4 catches. Seattle's been good at limiting explosive plays in the passing game this year. They've given up some big runs, but they've been really good at limiting big pass plays. There's been some unanticipated, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess shuffling among the cornerbacks this year. Reek Woolen has not been in year 2 what we thought he would be. He's been out of the starting lineup recently. Yeah, he's playing through an injury, but he's also just had some really bad reps out there. They've worked in Mike Jacson, who's much more physical. He's certainly less explosive of an athlete, but he's a much more physical athlete. They're working in Artie Burns. Trey Brown has played well. Devin Witherspoon coming back, I think, is going to be huge. But whether Jamal Adams plays, whether it's Julian Love getting most of those safety reps, Quandre Diggs, how are you feeling about the Seahawks defense ability to keep Pittsburgh from stealing touchdowns with those big plays?
I think the last 2 weeks in particular, like you mentioned, the capping explosives, they've been really good the last 2 weeks at preventing air yard explosives. And I think that is encouraging because that will limit, the Steelers kind of relying on having a puncher's chance where they just flip the field, like you said. I think Seattle's got that going for them. On the perimeter, like the isolation stuff, I kind of hope we see Devin on the outside so that he can be part of that picture of just bodying, the receivers, because those receivers like to body the defenders. They win just by strong arming you. I think I hope Woolen plays just because he's so good on contested catches in spite of, the busts with like zone assignments and stuff like that. I think like pure cover skills wise, Woolen is about the same as he was last year. Like just, when it's simple, when it's like, all right, I know I have this guy, and there's nothing else going on. I think he's pretty much like the talent is still there,
Listen, the biggest defensive play of that game, outside of maybe Draymond Jones' sack on the last drive, the biggest play of that game for Seattle's defense was Reek Woolen undercutting that kind of shallow sail route that Treylon Burks was running and almost picking the pass off on third down.
Insane recovery
because he got beat on that route. Yeah. And it reminded me of his play against Detroit. That was kind of his I am moment where he did the exact same thing. Undercutting at the time was TJ Hawkinson, and he picked it off like the exact same route, got beat on the first step, insane recovery speed, picked it off, took to the house. He almost did that in this play. He doesn't break that pass up. I think the Titans win that game. So we see that the talent is there. I'm holding hope that he's still only been playing cornerback for this is his third year ever doing it. Really, he played 1 year corner at a small school, and then obviously made a big splash last year. If he can continue to refine that first couple of steps of the route, I do think he still has all pro potential.
Oh, absolutely. And we have to remember he's under-repped. He's just in the grand.
And Pete's talked about that.
Yeah. He's not played a lot of football in his life. And I think he's inevitable. I think the all pros and Pro Bowls are inevitable. If some of his statistics, the yards per cover snap and, those global statistics to try to isolate individual play, he's still doing well in those. And it's primarily the more one-on-one situations. Even in zone, there are still one-on-one situations. Most of it is for an outside corner anyway. He's still doing well in a lot of that. It's kind of when he's not covering someone one-on-one, but he still has coverage responsibilities. He's just not quite progressing in that area. And then, like you said, some of those kind of do I have this guy? Do I not have that guy? Type stuff.
Yeah,
a little hesitant. Those things are adding up. That's probably why he's getting benched, and I think that's more Pete being just being his version of being a hard ass. I don't think he's actually saying I'm giving up on Tariq Woolen. I think this is his mode of wake up because you're going to be really good, but I need you to be really good. So this is my
and you can't preach competition and then not put it into action if a guy's underperforming.
Yeah. And look what Mike Jacson did. That probably lit a fire under Tariq, right? He's probably happy for his teammate, but he's I better get my shit together here,
This guy's playing football. Mike Jacson plays football.
Honestly, I wonder if they experiment with moving Mike to safety because they're going to he has the density for it. He has the mentality for it. I think he has the feet for it. And they're going to have vacancies at safety. and they're going to have still a huge clog at corner for the foreseeable future. I wonder if they try to get Mike snaps at safety. That's kind of a conversation for another time.
Sure,
but,
sure. I mean, we haven't even talked about Kobe Bryant all season, right? I mean, we could get into the weeds on the secondary alone for an hour, real quick, because I want to finish with talking about kind of the NFC at large. But last thing on this game, game gets played 10 times next Sunday in Seattle. How many times do the Seahawks win?
I'll go 6.5.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah,
that sounds right. That sounds right.
Yeah.
Okay. So now there's only 2 games left in this regular season. The Seahawks were a drive away from essentially being eliminated, functionally speaking, from the playoff picture against Philadelphia. They came through. They were in the same position last week. They came through. They are dancing on the knife's edge, but they are 8-7. If the playoffs started today, they're in as the 7th seed. So the way I'm going to frame this is, you look at all of the teams. I think there's 11 teams that have a chance of making the playoffs in the NFC. If the playoffs were being played on neutral fields, bowl game style, how many teams do they lose to in the NFC? Like, you have to bet $10,000 on a neutral field.
Yeah.
Remove the optimism straight up. Your nuts are on the line.
Yeah.
How many teams are beating Seattle?
The 49ers are definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, you said neutral field. So if it's in a dome versus grass outdoor, no, it's the 49ers are definitely. You know what? I'm going
to rephrase it. It's a random. It's going to be a random condition situation.
Random.
We're pulling it, weather, dome, turf, grass. We're pulling it out of a hat.
I think they're going to roll into the playoffs healthier than they've been for most of the season. I think if they get there. I think that they are as talented as any NFC team other than the 49ers. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to say it. I think they can beat anybody but the 49ers. Lions, Eagles, Cowboys.
Well, we've seen it. They beat the Lions and the Eagles. They almost beat the Cowboys. I'm not talking can. I'm saying you're betting will they?
Will. They definitely beat the Lions. I'm betting, my life savings on that. I think that they have their number. I think that the Eagles defense is really spotty, and I think that they can win a shootout with them, especially the way the Eagles construct themselves. The Eagles really aren't meant to come from behind either, similarly to the 49ers. Their drop-back game isn't as good as their play-action game and their neutral state offense, like where the RPO matters. Like when it comes to drop-back pass, they really don't have that offense. The Seahawks have... Honestly, after the Cowboys, they have the second best come from behind drop back pass offense, especially when the O-line is competent in the NFC. That's my opinion. Even better than the Lions, maybe equal to the Lions. The 49ers have, their pure drop back numbers are better than the Seahawks. But that's because they're playing so often with the lead or playing where the run game is still a factor in affecting the defensive personnel. I think the Seahawks are actually built to win a shootout if necessary.
I think that suits Seattle better than what most people think Pete Carroll wants.
Yeah.
Which is, to just kind of, and I actually am one of those people. I do think Pete Carroll wants to do that, and I think that's a little bit to his detriment. But when you're all about vibes, which Pete Carroll is an 11 out of 10 on vibes, and I think maybe like a 4 or 5 in game type of coach. I almost wish that he would lean into the shootouts a little bit more. Here's how I see it. There's one team that I'm stunned if Seattle beats, and that's the 49ers. They just don't match up.
Agreed. They just
don't. The second team that I'm really surprised that they beat is the Rams. I think that there's just a large enough sample size. Matt Stafford's healthy. Sean McVay absolutely has Pete Carroll's number. No question about it.
Yeah,
and Bobby Wagner is just destined to be on the losing side of every Seahawks-Rams game, whatever team he happens to be on. I think the Rams win most of those games. I would be surprised if the Seahawks beat the Eagles and the Cowboys. I think there's 4 teams that I would bet on beating Seattle. I give the Seahawks the edge against the Lions, and I give them the edge against the Vikings, any of the NFC South teams, all of that. the Packers, right? So, but right now, I think the Seahawks are the 5th best team in the NFC,
which is more than fair. I think my thing is that who they are, like there's a difference between being, Team X is better than Team Y, but on a good day they can beat them. I think who the Seahawks have been to this point is not who they're going to be in the playoffs.
Okay.
And that's kind of, that's definitely an optimistic, Coper's viewpoint. But I really believe at full strength, this team is like full strength, and the coaching staff putting forth their best game plan is as good as anyone but the 49ers, offense and defense. Now, that's the defensive thing is, with Uchenna being part of that equation and the secondary being completely healthy and stable.
You just got to apply. You got to apply that same thing to the other teams, though.
No, true, absolutely true. But I mean, like when they beat the Eagles, were the Eagles at full strength? I mean, I think they were.
I think we saw 60% of Jalen Hurts in that game. I mean,
that's true.
Jalen Hurts was like head between the knees every time his defense was on the field. I do think a healthy Jalen Hurts wins that Monday night game. I believe that in my bones.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just too I'm too preoccupied by that Cowboys game. But no, I totally see your viewpoint. I don't expect most people to think what I think on that. I'll say that. I get it for sure.
Yeah, and here's the thing: 5th best team in the NFC. Like, let's just assume for the sake of conversation that I'm right in this assessment. 5th best team in the NFC. A year and a half after trading Russell Wilson's pretty good.
It is. Yeah, I agree. Well, one thing that, this is kind of my big what if. Everyone's O-line gets hurt, but the extent to the amount of snaps they lost from their starters is like so significant. If this O-line was 80% of what any rational projection of what it was, or the projections we made coming into the season, if it was 80%, I think the results would follow, and we would have a wildly different perspective about this entire team's potential. I think
that may very well be true.
Talking about them as equivalent to the Eagles and the Cowboys. I honestly believe that, and Lions, which I think they are. And that's even with the defensive woes. We're not even talking about all the what-if games you can play with the defense. I think if this O-line was 80% of what it was supposed to be, we are talking about them as an absolute juggernaut on offense. And an absolute juggernaut on offense can beat just about anything in the league. So
I like that.
That's my big what if. And I think the O-line can get there come week 19 of the season. So
the next 2 to, if we're lucky, 4 weeks is going to be super fascinating with this team. Not only what it means for 2023, but I think the realistic timeline for true contention has always been 2024 and beyond. And for all of my frustrations with this team this year, none of them really transfer that heavily to 2024. I do see a team that is on the upswing. It's a young roster. I think the baseline is there. I mean, this is a true talent 9 to 11 win team each of the last 2 years. And, that's good enough to serve as a launching pad. Listen, Griff, this has been excellent, man, as it always is whenever you join us. Thank you for taking the time the morning after Christmas.
Appreciate it, guys. I a lot of fun. We're carrying over the merriness into the new year here.
Well, listen, man,
Seahawks,
if it were up to me, I would just talk football with you for an hour and a half every single day, because it makes me better at what I do. It makes me a smarter fan. Really appreciate it. Last thing before we get out of here, where can the people listening find more of you?
I do a podcast with my buddies, Matthew Brown, Matty F. Brown, and Ty Dan Gonzalez at Seattle Overload. You can type that in anywhere. It'll come up. I'm also on Twitter, so you can check me out there if you so choose. I don't shut up on Twitter. So
don't search Griffin Sturgeon. He won't come up. This man is pseudonyming his way to Seahawks Twitter fame.
The personification of Kristen Michael's spin move, as sometimes it's cool, but it's not always welcome. And that's kind of the energy I'm trying to capture. It's a little self-satirical in nature, but with affection, I think. So
at C Mike Spin Move, make sure you're following him. He is on the short list of Twitter accounts that will make you a smarter Seahawks fan. Griff, thanks again, man.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Had fun.
All right, y'all. That's going to do it for today. As always, you can find Mike and I on social media as well. I am on Twitter at @JacksonBevins. That's JACSON. Remember that no K is okay when spelling my name. Mike is on Twitter at @MikeBarwin, and the show itself is at Cigar Thoughts. You can catch full video episodes on our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts and find the rest of our socials at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Of course, you can listen to this show and read every article at fieldgoals.com. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like the show, drop us a 5-star rating and leave a quick review. Finally, be sure to check out cigarthoughtsnfl.com to get your exclusive Cigar Thoughts cigars, or hit me up on Twitter and I'll shoot you the deeds. And when you buy those cigars, reach out and tell us what you think. Thank you to all of y'all listening for your continued support of this show. We know you've only got so much time for podcasts in your life, and it's an honor to be a part of that for y'all. Please know that by sharing this show on social media and with your friends, you give us the juice to keep making this happen. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, onwards and upwards, my friends.